Joining me now is Luqman Ahmed Way, Distinguished Professor of Democracy at the University of Toronto and the author of numerous books, including Revolution and Dictatorship, The Violent Origins of Durable Authoritarianism, and Joyce Vance, former United States Attorney, co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast, and an MSNBC contributor. Welcome to you both. Luqman, I think we're getting a commission from the University of Toronto. This show, we had Jason Stanley on at 10 o'clock. You have studied how authoritarian regimes consolidate power. Talk to me about ICE's expansion under Trump. I don't mean to be alarmist, but there are things happening that are not supposed to happen in a democracy as it relates to ICE.
Absolutely, there's a tremendous reason to be alarmed. First of all, professional career bureaucrats, they're boring. They are the bulwark of all democracies. These are the people whose loyalty is to the Constitution and not to whoever president is in power. Dictatorships, by contrast, rely on, you call it the secret police, Gestapo, the Presidential Guard in Africa, the KGB in the Soviet Union. These are forces that are loyal to the leader in power, not to any rule of law or democracy. And that is exactly, I think, why we should be so concerned about the rapid expansion of ICE. So, one of the impediments that Trump faces with agencies like the FBI and the IRS is that they're staffed by career bureaucrats who have a professional norm, and their primary loyalty is not to the president, but to the Constitution. But when he rapidly expands ICE, he's going to be able to hire veterans of January 6th and other loyalists who are really sort of whose commitment is to Trump and the Republican Party and not to the Constitution and due process. And that is very, very dangerous.
Joyce, with Kilmar Abrego, there was all this talk about his tattoos, right? That's apparently was motivating for some people. When Tom Homan said that ICE doesn't have to have probable cause and can do it based on what someone looks like, again, I don't know enough about this. You and I have talked for many years about the fact that I get my legal training from Law and Order. But talk to me about this. Maybe he's right, but the way he said it sounded really weird, that ICE can just roll around and find people who look, I don't know like what, and detain them.
But in reality, ICE can't do that. And that's what the judge in Los Angeles yesterday said. You can't simply racially profile or profile people based on their national origin and start pulling them off the streets. That, by definition, is police state. And I think this point about the way institutions consolidate power in regimes that are trending towards totalitarianism is important. It used to be that ICE, which has criminal responsibilities, not just immigration ones, when it was formed after 9/11, legacy customs agents were rolled into the operation. So you had these people, the boring career bureaucrats with training, who knew how to go after complicated conspiracy cases. They knew that their job was to go after the people running, for instance, drug trafficking organizations, not mules. And what we see now is folks that are focusing on meeting Trump's quotas and deporting people. And if they're even taking time to look at the criminal side of the operation, they're perhaps prosecuting people who've illegally re-entered the country after being deported, which is a federal felony, rather than looking at the business owners that are employing them, the people that are most culpable. Those people get a pass. So to Homan's point, this is about targeting vulnerable people, people who are brought to this country for whatever purpose. And also the dangerousness here is that the people in charge are no longer the career officials with training who understand loyalty to the Constitution. These are quite literally people who understand loyalty to Donald Trump.
So, Luke, on one hand, and Radley Balco and Jason Stanley made this point a couple hours ago, and that is that we should have empathy for people, migrants, or in this case, just people who look a certain way, who are getting swept up by ICE. And that should be its own problem. But there is another thing here, and that is historically in other parts of the world where there have been these authoritarian police regimes, they start as something and they go after the other, but then they're a thing. Then they are the force of that movement or that authoritarian, and they can be used for a lot of things.
Absolutely. No, that is the real danger. We haven't gotten quite there yet, but I think what we need to look out for is when we see ICE doing activities that really have nothing to do with immigration. That's, what we should be concerned about, because, there is a danger, I think, that ICE will sort of be the sort of go-to course of agency by Trump because that's where the loyalists are. That's where the January 6th, potentially January 6th veterans are, and that's the easiest thing for him to use. So that's what I worry about is the sort of expansion of ICE. I mean, as you said, exactly that the targeting of these vulnerable immigrants is one thing, but it could actually get much worse and turn into something that really attacks the core of the constitutional system in the United States.
And what we've got, the converse of this, the inverse of this, Joyce, is we've got the FBI, which is either being hollowed out by decision by Trump loyalists, or we've got a lot of career FBI people who are leaving. The FBI's been through this, right? They've been a tool of repression at certain points in its history, and it's learned institutionally why that's not the case. ICE is going to become bigger than the FBI, and it's not quite certain what the FBI is going to become over the next couple of years.
Trump has put a lot of capital into diminishing public confidence in the FBI. It used to be that we viewed them as the top law enforcement operation in the world. These days, Donald Trump has managed to damage people's confidence that the FBI is keeping them safer. We've forgotten the lessons of 9/11 so quickly. So what does this look like moving forward, I think, is the question. The FBI has strong internal mechanisms for building agents who understand what their jobs are. There are, for instance, special agents in charge of FBI offices across the country. And the question is whether Kash Patel and the Trump administration will be able to replace that career leadership with people who will complete the hollowing out of the FBI, or whether they will simply become irrelevant and ICE will be given more capabilities. But there's a barrier here, and maybe there's some good news, right? Because by statute, DHS has certain authority, ICE has certain authority, and Congress needs to awaken from the stupor that it's been in and wake up to the fact that it needs to play its role in setting institutional boundaries and imposing limits on a runaway executive branch before it's too late.
Look, I want to ask you about a thing that there's been an overlap between some of the things that ICE is doing and some of these concerns about speech, right? In places that you've studied, when we normalize targeting people, and the Secretary of State have said this, particularly in the case of one of the students that was arrested, detained, and now has been released and is suing the government, that it might be because of something they might do that might be contrary to the U.S.'s foreign interests. That's where this becomes a problem. That's incorrect, and that is ripe for some court challenges. But we now have an enforcement arm that might go around and arrest people based on something that they posted on social media.
Well, right. So you've had a number of instances where students have been arrested simply for what they said, for the fact that they've criticized administration policy. I mean, this is blatantly unconstitutional. And it's been targeted at people who are not necessarily citizens or not born in the United States, but it's really not too much of a step to imagine that would start being used to target people who, by any definition, are citizens of the United States. And I think it's also important to recognize that, while I'm somewhat comforted by the statutes and laws which say that sort of ICE has to stick to its core activities, we've seen Trump blow by all sorts of red lines, and for the Supreme Court sort of give it sort of a stamp of approval ex post. So I'm really actually perhaps a little bit less confident than the other guests in the capacity of the system to resist Trump's overt violation of the Constitution.
Joyce, let me ask you one thing.
And the transformation.
Because you were a prosecutor, I want to ask you, there are legitimate reasons why some enforcement agencies, some police agencies go undercover or, do things in shadows to achieve certain things. I would assume that's specific and it needs to comport with some laws.
Exactly. There are very serious legal restrictions around the use of, for instance, FBI agents as undercover operatives. Very strict rules regarding how it's done, what they can do, what they can't do. But you know what I've never seen a federal agent working a case do is pull a mask up so nobody knows who they are and go out and terrorize a civilian population. And I think it's important for us at this point to be very plain speaking when we say that this is not normal, it's not acceptable, and it's a danger sign. We're well past the point where we can just identify danger signs and say, oh, there might be problems down the road. The problems are here, they're in the right now, And as we see people being pulled off the streets, you know, the danger to law enforcement, quite frankly, is that when you're masked like that and people don't know who you are, someone might exercise their lawful right of self-defense to protect themselves, thinking they're being kidnapped. So the notion that this is for law enforcement's protection is utterly ludicrous, and we need to do away with that.
Thank you to both of you. We appreciate your analysis on this. Luqman Ahmed Way is a distinguished professor of democracy at the University of Toronto, author of Revolution and Dictatorship, The Violent Origins of Durable Authoritarianism. Joyce Vance is a former United States attorney, co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast, and an MSNBC contributor.